Welcome back, fellow scientists. So today we start chapter 10, which is all about blood. So I have put a copy of the blank notes on OneNote. So if you go into, well, it's two places actually. If you go into Content Library, blank notes, right, it's right there, but you can't write on that. That's just kind of a backup copy if you want to like print it or save it, or if you mess up your copy, you can go and you can copy and paste it and whatnot. So then I distributed your copy into the tab called Handouts. At least it should be there. I checked Darius's before. His was actually there into handouts. Yeah, there you go. So if you look in your notebook under handouts, then notes should be there, and then those are things that you can actually change. Those are documents you can actually change. You can actually write on. So, anyways, go ahead and find those. I'll pull up my notes real quick. What color should I use? Red. Okay, perfect. I already had one false attempt, one false start for this chapter. So we'll just leave that. All right, so chapter 10, it's all about blood, right? So obviously medical tubes of blood, and then here are the major veins and arteries of the hand with everything else dissected away. So this is actually a really short chapter. It should just take us like 3 or 4 class periods to get through. So we're obviously going to combine this with, oh, I think maybe it's chapter 11, I forget, but with lymph and immune system, because you'll see they work really well together. They go hand in hand. So let's get some basics out of the way. All right. So your book refers to it as the River of Life, which it is for reasons that we'll talk about. But then it also harkens back to chapter 3, I think it was, where we talked about all the different types of tissue. So blood is actually a connective tissue. Right? So we have bone, we have tendons, we have ligaments, we have fat, right? And then we have areolar tissue, loose connective tissue, and then we have blood. Okay, so river of life for the following reasons. Number one, it delivers nutrients. Number two, it carries away waste. Right, carries it to the liver and to the kidneys and to the lungs to get rid of it. Three, it fights disease. Four, it repairs itself. It's a self-healing uh, material, which is amazing. So self-healing, it repairs itself. Right? Not everything can say that. Neurons can't say that. Muscles can't say that. They don't. They don't. Well, I mean, if you just injure it a little bit, I guess. But if you like completely tear a muscle, like you're done. You need surgery. It's not coming back from that. So self-healing, wound repair. It is slightly basic. Right? So it has a pH of about 7.4. There's a range like 7.35 to 7.45 is what your book says. This was interesting. It's actually slightly warmer than body temperature. It averages about 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Your book didn't go into why. I personally think it's because blood is moving and blood is under pressure. So when I was in the Marine Corps, I worked on the hydraulic system on a helicopter, and that hydraulics fluid, because it was under pressure and because it was moving, like that got hot, right? If any of you have used like a log splitter or something like that, that's typically a hydraulic ram uses hydraulic fluid. So I think that's the reason why blood is a little bit warmer because of the friction, because it's moving, and because of pressure, right? Chemistry nerds, ideal. I guess it's a gas law. PV equals nRT. But if something is under pressure, it's gonna be a higher temperature. All right. So slightly warmer than body temperature. Interesting to know that blood comprises about 8%. That looks like a 9, but that's actually an 8. 8% of body weight in non-pregnant people. And the volume of blood. So when we were at the cadaver lab, Justin talked about the stroke volume of the heart, which I think it was like a liter a minute, if memory serves. So how much blood do you have in your body? Well, the typical adult male has 5 to 6 liters of blood. 5 to 6 liters of blood. And if you are a pregnant female, that actually increases by 50%. So that increases uh, if pregnant, then that increases by about 2.5 to 3 liters. So you increase your blood volume about 50%. And then, of course, in sports, you can get in trouble if you mess with it. So blood doping, we're going to talk about that. All right, sweet. So that's kind of the basics. That's a little bit of background, a little interesting tidbits. So let's go on now and let's talk about our question for this slide is what is blood made of? So two basic parts, right? So we have the plasma, which as you can see here is 55% of the blood volume. So plasma is the liquid part of the blood. And this liquid contains all sorts of stuff. It contains salts, right, which we talked about in the muscular and nervous system, very, very important. Sodium, potassium, oh, what else? Calcium, right? All those are salts. Nutrients, right? So sugars, different things like that. Obviously, wastes, right? So not just CO2 and O2, but uric acid, uh, different things like that. Waste from cells, old dead organelles, stuff like that. And then, of course, we mentioned it, but we'll write it down. Excuse me, gases. So CO2, right, and O2 are carried. Some of it in the liquid part of the blood. Most oxygen is carried by the red blood cells. We'll get to that though. CO2 is all carried in the liquid part. With how is it carried? Bicarb. There you go. H3 H2CO3. Uh, so that's waste. Hormones are carried in the blood, in the liquid part of the blood. And then antibodies, which interact with cells, but they're not actually cells, right? So uh, blood plasma is the liquid, and it carries these things. And then the white blood cells, platelets, and the red blood cells all together, these are called the formed elements. So the formed elements, if you can do a little simple math, make up 45% of blood volume, right? And so, of course, we have our red blood cells, and then we have our white blood cells, and then we have our platelets, which are actually little fractions of cells that kind of pinched off, and they kind of circulate throughout the blood. Throughout the body. So we'll go more into depth about all of these, but those are kind of the things that blood is made of. All right. So next question then, how is blood made? That'll be our guiding question. Can I write? Yeah, there we go. That'll be our guiding question for here. So how is blood made? All right, so obviously remember from our skeletal system that blood is made in our red bone marrow. Uh, Red bone marrow is mostly found in the flat bones, right? So pelvis, all the bones of the skull, sternum, ribs, right, is kind of what your book called out as the major blood makers. And then also blood is made in the proximal epiphysis, proximal epiphysis of the humerus, and the femurs. Excuse me. So that's where blood is made, right? How blood is made, there is one in all those bones in the red bone marrow. There's one major blood stem cell, which we're going to write this down. This is important. Is called the hemocytoblast. 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 And then from the hemocytoblast, it makes other different types of cells. We don't really need to remember this. We don't really need to remember this. But there's one main blood stem cell that then goes ahead and makes the red blood cells and the platelets, and then all the white blood cells. So that's how the blood is made. So now that we've kind of answered those big questions, now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each of the different major types of cells. And so we're going to start with the smallest ones. We're going to start with the platelets. So guiding question for this page is, how do platelets work? How do platelets work? So I have here pictured little diagram to help us learn this. So first of all, of course, we have to have an injury, whether that's stabbing, cutting, blunt force trauma, too much pressure, weakened vessel wall, something happens to injure a blood vessel. So when that happens, the first thing that our body does to kind of repair that, they call it a vessel spasm, which your book also uses that. I'm going to use words that we've used before, so it's vasoconstriction. Vaso vasoconstriction. So the blood vessel literally like contracts or tightens up or kind of right tries to kind of like slow the flow of blood through the vessel, right? So vasoconstriction, number one. Number two, then platelets, because there are collagen fibers that are now exposed that didn't used to be exposed in an intact vessel wall. The platelets are actually attracted to those collagen fibers, and whereas running through a normal vessel, they're just going to slide right past the vessel wall. If they encounter those collagen fibers, then they actually become sticky and they form something called a platelet plug. Right, so the platelet plug forms, and this is one of those positive feedback loops where then once they stick to the collagen fibers, then they release hormones and they attract more platelets and more platelets and more platelets and more platelets and more platelets. So it's a positive feedback loop. It's kind of self-fulfilling, right? Once it starts, then it's hard to stop it. But then eventually, once all those collagen fibers are kind of encapsulated and not exposed anymore, uh, then that clotting cascade kind of stops, and the platelets just kind of go on by. So number two, platelet plug, right? And number three then is that the platelet plug then attracts another thing in the plasma in the blood called fibrin, which makes a stronger mesh, and that's actually the clot. So number three, the platelet plug causes the clot to form. Clot forms. All right, sweet. So we'll come back to this. I'm going to try to do a jigsaw lesson for our next lesson. I think that's going to be on Thursday. I'll open up a Zoom meeting and then we'll separate into groups and you'll each have your own topics and different things like that. I'll explain more about that at the end. But then last slide that we want to talk about is just really quickly, we want to just get the names of the white blood cells in our heads. So names of the white blood cells, we have a neutrophil. Right. So we'll go into in the next chapter like specifics about what some of these do. We're not going to go into specifics of what all of them do. But you should at least just be able to recognize the names of white blood cells. So neutrophil, this is the most abundant, right? And this comprises about 40 to 70% of your white blood cells. Next in line, we have our lymphocytes, which are the second most abundant, and they comprise between 20 to 45% of your blood volume. And then these other ones are all like in the single digits of percent, so we're not really going to go into that. But a basophil and an eosinophil and a monocyte, right? And you guys have looked at blood tissue under the microscope, so you all recognize these as red blood cells, and then you may have seen like one or two, like purpley, globby looking like things, and I told you that those were white blood cells. Well, so these different types of cells, they do different things. Like I said, we'll talk about that in the next chapter. But they also look different under the microscope, and so these drawings aren't just like random, but they actually kind of correspond to what they look like under the microscope. All right, sweet. So now let's talk about our jigsaw lesson. Which we're going to do on Thursday. So part of your homework for today, which is Tuesday, I'm going to assign each of you a homeostatic imbalance. And then just really quickly, like 5-10 minutes of research, right? All I want you to do is just kind of describe the condition and then give me some stats, give me some facts, give me some figures about the condition. How prevalent is it? How serious is it? Are there treatments? Different things like that. So that's kind of your homework. That's part of your homework for Tuesday, for today. And then Thursday, I'll open up a Zoom meeting, and then I'll put you in your homeostatic imbalance groups in separate rooms, right? So you guys can kind of share out and talk about the research that you got, and then we'll all come back together as a class, and then I'll separate you back out into mixed groups so that each group will have one person that is an expert on that homeostatic imbalance, and then you'll teach each other, and so it'll be great. So our homeostatic imbalances that we're going to talk about, of course, we have to talk about hemophilia, right? We're going to talk about embolisms. So embolus, we're going to talk about a factor called TPA, tissue plasminogen activator, right? TPA. We're going to talk about thrombocytopenia, right? And so these all kind of have to deal with platelets and with blood clotting and different things like that. And then we're also going to venture into the realm of the white blood cells. So we're going to talk about leukemia. You guys are going to learn about leukemia. L-E-U, I apologize. K-E-M-I-A, leukemia. And then I want to kind of, and this is the least clear of all the ones that I'm giving you, but I want you guys to figure out how white blood cells affect autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune disease and white blood cells. So autoimmune disease is when your immune system attacks itself, right? So do white blood cells play a role in that? Do they play a role in specific autoimmune diseases and not others? So that's kind of what I want you to research. Now, again, this is not going to be like a really in-depth, like, hour-long presentation. Just kind of describe what it is and give one or two stats or facts or figures or whatnot. So this research should not take you too long. It should take you like 5 or 10 minutes. Just Google Wikipedia, something like that. So let me find. Here it is. So I broke you up into groups. We're just doing it alphabetical order. So Allison, Grant, Darius, and Aubrey, you guys have hemophilia. Research that. Abby, Jackson, Sydney, Shaylin, you guys have embolus. Jazz, Zach, Teg, and Hanbi, you guys have TPA. Faith, Mackenzie, Colby, and Miley, you guys have thrombocytopenia. Megan, Jonathan, Skyla, and Liv, you guys have leukemia. And then Ian and Lily and Juan, you guys have autoimmune and white blood cells. And then because we need a 24th person, then I'll also research autoimmune and white blood cells, and I'll be a part of that group. And then the numbers work out and they're even. So, anyways, that's your homework assignment. Hopefully, you find it stimulating and challenging and doable all at the same time. So this has been Mr. Leo. We've learned about just very quickly about the introduction to blood and about platelets and about white blood cells, how blood is made, how blood is formed. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on the flip side.